Hello, my name is Ryan Mazur, and I will be presenting my lab number 4 Rijke tube combustion experiment. Now, moving on to the introduction. A Rijke tube is a simple pulse combustor. Due to fluctuations of heat and pressure in the Rijke tube, periodic oscillations occur within the tube and resonate out, similar to an organ pipe. Pressure and velocity drive each other in the tube, causing what can be considered as a positive feedback loop in which pressure drives velocity, which contributes to a more efficient mixing of the combustion species, as well as a more efficient heat transfer to the outer walls, which ultimately increases the pressure in the tube, continuing to drive the process. In a Rijke tube, due to the top and bottom of the tube being open to ambient atmospheric conditions, these positions are considered antinodes, and they can be seen on the right. When resonance is optimized, the primary frequency produced by the Rijke tube is the first harmonic, which corresponds to a wavelength of 1/2 the length of the tube, because both ends must be considered antinodes. For our Rijke tube, we placed a propane source roughly 1/4 of the length from the bottom to drive the resonance. The significance of this experiment is that acoustic oscillations, such as Rijke tube, can be utilized in further aerospace applications due to their efficient heat transfer and combustion species mixing. Now, moving on to the approach. On the left of the first figure, you can see the overall setup of which a tube contains a heat source, and there is a fan on a scissor lift at the bottom. The fan initially drives the oscillations, and it can be raised or lowered. At the top of the tube, you can see a decoupler. This acts similar to a car's muffler and allows the gases to be expelled into the atmosphere. Furthermore, you can see the valve located on the back of the tube. This allows for oscillations to either occur or cease, depending on whether they're opened or closed. If the tube is open, it is unable to maintain those pressures and oscillations will not occur. The experiment utilizes two types of sensors, pressure transducers and a photomultiplier. The pressure transducers, which you can see a diagram on the right, work by utilizing a piezoelectric pressure sensor that utilizes the strain of a material and a known material property to produce a voltage that can then be converted to PSI with a calibration curve. The photomultiplier works by measuring the photons produced by the chemiluminescence of the radical species of the combustion reaction. It is actually found that the majority of the light and luminance from these combustions actually come from the intermediate radical species that happen during the combustion process. As you can see on the right, we can see a setup of the pressure transducer in which a semi-infinite tube is placed perpendicular to the flow in order to increase the temperature, in order to protect the temperature variant sensors. In our experiment, 4 trials were recorded, where the flame source was at 0 inch with the valve both opened and closed, 2 inches with the valve closed, and 4 to 6 inches with the valve closed. The fan, sensor, and data acquisition equipment were first turned on and the propane tank was open. Then the flame was lit and the sensors began collecting data at a sample rate of 5,000 per sample, in which RMS voltage, peak frequency, associated phase, as well as others were collected. Now, moving on to the results. Once the data was collected from the sensors, the RMS voltage for the pressure transducers were converted to PSI and then were converted to decibels by multiplying 20 by the log of the root mean squared fluctuation of the pressure field over the nominal root mean squared pressure fluctuation that corresponds to the threshold of human hearing. Furthermore, based on the length of the tube, a resonance of roughly 94.15 Hertz was calculated. Finally, the relative phase of the pressure radiation signals were calculated by finding the difference between each phase and the signal, from the middle sensor. Below, you can see the Excel spreadsheets in which all of these calculations were made, as well as the calibration curve equation at the bottom and the estimation of the resonance frequency. Now, moving on to conclusion. In conclusion, the experiment allowed for one to understand how a Rijke tube, as well as provide a deeper understanding of the combustion process for acoustic oscillations. However, there were some errors. Based on the amplitude of the sound oscillations, we can see that the SPLs were in the range of roughly 130 and 155 decibels. This would be nearly impossible for our Rijke tube experiment to produce, Or rather, if it did successfully produce these sounds, it would have left the TAs and students conducting the lab with permanent hearing damage. However, the exact results of this do not go nearly as far as the implications of this lab. While turbines and other jet engines may actually have reduced efficiency due to acoustic oscillations, many other types of pulse jet engines actually become more efficient with this mixing and heat transfer. Of those, hypersonic travel can be considered a potential use of this type of pulse jet engine. And hypersonic travel is very important to the future of space exploration because it is currently being looked at as a way to cheaply transport humans from the ground to low Earth orbit. Now, moving on to the final slide, I would like to ask if you have any questions, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.